Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Call us at 719-452-4803. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are excited to come to you today with a new setup. We are in a different office. Dr. Mark has switched from our north office to our central office, and so we're playing around with a couple things, seeing how it all works out. And today, we wanted to talk a little bit about trauma and teens. And Dr. Mayfield, you were recently asked by Focus on the Family to write an article about the difference between different traumas in marriage. So would you mind opening us up with kind of an overview of how we think about trauma and why that's important when we're talking about teens and trauma?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, even as far back as like 1980, 1981, trauma was reserved for PTSD, which was reserved for combat. And so the notion that a human being in the real world, the civilian world, if you want to use military terms, was to have trauma was almost ridiculous. And as we began to study, as we began to explore what trauma really is and what it does to the body, we're realizing that anybody can have trauma. And it doesn't have to be, this is where I think we get dismissive. And I think I want to be very careful that we're not dismissing somebody's pain or somebody's experiences. But in the past, we've been very dismissive that, oh, sweetie, that's not really trauma. Like, you know, that was just, you were just bullied at school, made fun of. Like, how could that be trauma? Well, you know, when we look at what trauma does to the body and how it manifests in the body, it could be just as impactful as seeing an IED blow up in, Iraq. And just how the body filters it, how the body experiences and that kind of stuff. One of my favorite books, and I think we've shared this on this podcast a couple times, of The Body Remembers, or The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It really talks about how our body, our brain never turns off. And so it's always experiencing the nuances of what's going on around us. And so if I get in a car accident and you're with me, right? And so you're my passenger in the car accident, I might experience that event far different than you. Why? One, because, I'm kind of responsible for you. You're my passenger.
You're driving.
I'm driving, right? And maybe it triggers my last car accident that happened when I was 18 and I almost died or whatever. And now I'm walking away with some severe trauma, and you're like, yeah, that really stunk.
Yeah.
But I'm okay.
Yeah.
And so big T, small t trauma doesn't diminish this idea that it's any less impactful. So small t trauma, really failure, loss, disappointment, shame,
Yeah.
right? Feelings of inadequacy or being left out, or, when we talk about bullying, I actually think bullying, there's very levels. Bullying can be on a spectrum. There's being made fun of, calling names.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's, it goes to the abuse side of things
definitely.
as well. But then there's big T trauma, assault, major car accident.
Abuses, neglect.
Combat,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And so I think nowadays, 30, 40 years past, the late 70s, early 80s, where it was just combat. Now we're recognizing if my kid experiences shame in front of a classroom, and now they're having nightmares, and now they're not eating and they're not sleeping, a parent's typical response could be, well, just get over it.
Yeah.
It was just being made fun of in front of class, where the kid's like, no, like it was more than that.
Something that's been really interesting in my learning as a soon-to-be therapist.
Almost there.
Has been there that two people can experience the same thing, come out of it with different reactions.
Yep.
And when it comes to trauma and shame, that it's not necessarily their own cognitive doing. They're not purposely or bent towards one way or another. Their bodies are keeping that. And so for one person, standing up in front of a classroom and being embarrassed is no big deal. And that may or may not have anything to do with their social resiliency or their emotional resilience, anything. They could be almost the exact same person and experience it different because their body is taking that. I'm reading a book by Kate D. Nicola. I think I'm probably messing up that name. She wrote Because of Winn-Dixie.
Oh, yeah.
And Despero. And she also wrote a book called A Tiger Rising. And in the book, there's a young boy named Rob who has recently lost his mother. And recently, after losing his mother, his legs break out in this rash-looking thing. And throughout the few first chapters, he's talking about how he doesn't cry and he has not thoughts, where he chooses not to think by putting everything in a suitcase and sitting on top of it. Right. And he found this tiger and he's able to put the tiger on top. And there's a housekeeper who he's talking to who essentially says the reason you have this rash on your legs is because you're not feeling. Right. And it's been really interesting to see how the body interacts with our psychology in how we process moments in such a severe way that it can literally cause physical ailments as well.
Well, and we talked about this recently in some of our most recent podcasts, but our non-physical, the mind, the spiritual, emotional part of who we are, has such power over our physical body. And so if we're not allowing, I almost think of it like a river, right? So if we're allowing the river to flow, and we're allowing things to come downstream from upstream, and it's this process, we're not hindering that process. It's flow of thought, flow of story, flow of experience. That's very cathartic. It's very powerful because we're allowing those things to flow out of us. But many of us dam it up. Many of us build that dam to not allow things to flow, and now it's stagnant, now it's stuck. And if you think about a stagnant pond, a pond that has no water coming in or out of it, what usually happens?
It stagnates.
It grows algae, it gets dirty,
mosquitoes.
It just gets kind of nasty.
Yeah.
But the minute you introduce fresh water to it, what happens, right? It all the sediments and the filthy pieces of it get to flow out of it. And I think that's how I view some of these things with our mind and with our bodies and our trauma, that if we're not allowing those things to process through us, hard as they might be, we're causing our body to stagnate. And so I've got countless stories of clients that I've worked with that have come in with physical ailments that they can't figure out. And then as we start digging into their story and figuring out what's going on, it's abuse, it's stress, it's unforgiveness, it's bitterness, it's whatever this might be, and it's manifesting in their bodies in ways that they're like, doctors can't figure out what's wrong with me. I'm like, well, I can tell you what's wrong with you, and let's process it out. This one story of this young woman I worked with that was just under some extreme stress and had some traumas in her life that she hadn't worked through, and it was manifesting in numbness in her feet. She couldn't feel her feet, and she went to doctors after doctors after doctors, and they were doing neurology tests and experiences, of MRIs and whatever, nothing. Yeah. As we started to work through her traumas and unforgiveness and bitterness, her feeling in her feet started coming back. Yeah. It's not voodoo science or anything like that. It's just, right. And so I think with teens, looking at parents going, well, my teen is acting out, or they're grumpy, or they're not, there's whatever it might be. What's the root cause? What's behind that? I think we often focus on what's in front of us.
Well, and I was going to ask about teens too, because it seems to me as though an adult may be able to understand if I have trauma and I'm seeing physical manifestations of that, I should work through the trauma. And there's a little bit more opportunity for logic and reasoning in the midst of it. You'd hope so. But even on a neurological perspective,
sure,
we have access to that logical part of us. And we've talked before about how teens don't always have access to that logical frontal aspect of their brains.
Right.
So how does that change the way trauma works and how treatment works and how discovering there is a problem and what we can do with it?
I don't know necessarily if it changes much because the frontal cortex is still working in the teen. It's just they're not maybe making those connections on their own. The brain is still functioning in those things, but it's interesting to me to see. I think this is well, let's backtrack for a second. I think this is where it's important for the parent to bridge that gap. So where I think we see a lot of issues with our teens is that their emotional intelligence is low, their intentionality is misguided or not there. The active parenting piece, the ability to see and speak life into their kids. Some of the things that we see on a regular basis in this practice is maybe well-meaning parents, but they're missing the mark. And so I think this is where parents need to bridge the gap for their kids and kind of be that stopgap or that voice. Hey, you're not yourself. Like, talk. What's going on? And be able to ask questions, seeking to understand, I think is a big deal, because parents tend to go, and this is for whatever reason, it's not not new to our millennia, but it's parents are trying to fix, and they think they know what's best, and they may very well in a lot of these areas, but try to tell a 16-year-old what's best without engaging them and inviting them into the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to get some of that resistance and that pushback. And so I think the ability for parents to be that bridge to the frontal cortex is a big deal, but we don't do that.
So let's say we have a parent who has a teenager who got into a car accident recently, and it has caused X, Y, and Z. There's some things that have changed in that child's behavior after the accident or whatever. How does that parent help their teenager? What are the steps that they should take in that process?
Well, it depends on the severity, I think. But I think off the top of my head, I think the biggest thing is to go get them evaluated with a counselor or a psychologist, just to kind of make sure that maybe do they have PTSD or not. If they do, then there's a course of action to take, right? And we would suggest maybe a somatic psychotherapy, whether it be equine therapy or EMDR type of therapy, to really help them process through those things. But I think it's also giving them a chance to create a space to be, to emote, to vent. I mean, it's a process of getting the story out. I mean, really, is what it is. And I think a lot of times with teenagers, they aren't able to put the thought to the feeling, if that makes any sense, right? So help them explore the feelings. One of the things I've shared a lot in my talks is, you're not going to ask, a lot of times we ask their kids, what were you thinking? And the answer is, I don't know. And that's a very valid answer a lot of times, because they're interacting out of their feelings. And so asking the kid, so tell me how you're feeling. What are you feeling? Where are you feeling it in your body? This is where the parent needs to be very much more emotionally intelligent. And then working back to the thoughts.
Yeah. Kind
of backing into it. But when it comes to big T or small T trauma, I really want to encourage our listeners and our parents to go, there's not any shame in raising the white flag and saying, I need to find somebody outside of me to get help. Why? Well, because if you become the fixer or the catalyst for change or whatever in your family, are you then really a safe place? Where this kid needs a safe place without judgment, without condemnation, without trying to be fixed, a place that they can emote and be safe. And somebody else needs to be that person that can be the catalyst for change. And so that makes sense?
Yeah. Of just reaching out and getting the help that you and your kid needs. Yeah. Do you think that it's super interesting talking about shame? Because I think I got on board with understanding that there are big T and little T traumas, and that little T traumas don't have to be they can be almost unnoticeable to somebody else. Sure. And then I heard you talking about how shame is treated the same way as trauma. And I don't know many people who didn't have some amount of shame in their childhood.
Right.
I think that's just a part of human development and the human experience, is we are going to go through things that are embarrassing or shameful. What makes it trauma? What keeps shame as a trauma rather than just an embarrassing story that you can share at a party to get to know people?
Well, think about it. I don't know many of your young childhood stories, but let me just create a scenario, right? So let's say Johnny is really excited because Dad's home in the morning from work, and Dad's sitting on the couch reading a book, and Johnny's 5 years old and knows that Dad loves orange juice. Absolutely loves orange juice, and so he knows where the orange juice is in the kitchen, and gets a cup and kind of fumbles and drops a plastic cup on the ground, and Dad pipes up, "Hey, what's going on in there?" "I'm just getting some orange juice." And Dad's like, "Okay, don't spill." Right? And then Johnny gets this orange juice out, and it's the big old, Simply Orange, and it's kind of heavy for a 5-year-old. And
Yeah.
he gets the top off and puts the cup on the ground and pours, but it goes everywhere. And Dad comes in and goes, "What's wrong with you? I told you not to spill." Right? So, okay, so let's pause there for a second.
Yeah.
How do you think Johnny's feeling?
Ashamed, embarrassed, scared, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and Dad's not a bad guy. He's just coming in, and he's like, he likes a clean house, and he's
It's his day off.
Right,
His
it's
kid
his day
just
off.
spilled orange
Right.
juice everywhere. He's got to mop it up.
So think about, what was Johnny's intention?
To love his father through bringing him orange juice.
Right. What was Dad's intention?
To instill discipline in his child so that he doesn't spill orange juice.
Right, or I don't want to be messy, right?
Yeah.
They're missing. He's missing his son.
Yeah.
So his response to Johnny's intention is shame producing. So as a 5-year-old, how do you process that? I'm not loved. Dad doesn't appreciate what I'm doing. Right, whatever that might be. And Johnny's 5 years old, so Johnny's not really thinking through these things like an adult would. It's just happening now in his body. I'm embarrassed. Dad's yelling at me. I spilled. I'm somehow now less than because I spilled. Right, like all these things are happening, and now it's kind of becoming a part of his story. And so next time, do you think Johnny's going to try?
Probably not. Less likely to try.
Less likely to try, right? So now his story is that, well, I'm less than, I can't. Right, so now it's this subtle integration of his identity is built up in that story. Now, Dad has a chance to fix that.
Okay.
Right? So if we're talking about attachment now, Dad's ability to fix that is to see Johnny's face when he comes into the kitchen and going, "Oh, shoot. Like, I just totally missed what he was trying to do for me." And Dad can get down on his knees and say, "You know what, Johnny, I am so sorry that I raised my voice. I see that you're wanting to take care of me this morning with my orange juice. Hey, I'll clean it up. You continue to pour. Thank you so much. I am so sorry that I raised my voice," right? Now that shame is squelched. It might be still a little bit of a thread there.
Yeah.
But Dad has now made that repair and seen Johnny.
Yeah, which is that parenting idea of rupture and repair, which is vital. What if the rupture didn't come from the dad? What if this scenario happened in a public space at school? He was bringing his friend the orange juice, and his friend lashed out. He comes home. Parent sees this. What do you think the process for rupturing a repair that wasn't caused by a parent or yourself?
I think you can do some. You can allow your kid. You can see your kid. I mean, that's the whole idea of seen, safe, soothed, and secure for an attachment standpoint. You can see your kid for what's happened and speak what you see into it, not just the physical and the right in front of you, but what's behind it. But that's how you help build them resilience, right? So this still might be a small T trauma, but how do you help them work through it? Because here's the thing: small T traumas, if we bring them to the forefront, and we see them for what it is, we can work through that, and it still becomes a part of our story. Big T trauma then is sometimes where we need the extra help. So that's where resiliency comes in. That's where grit is built.
So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is if my child has experienced a small T trauma or a really shameful event, acknowledging it, talking about it, discussing it, validating it, that's the process that I can step into to help them. And then if it is something that is maybe more severe or seems to be affecting them in a more severe way, reaching out to somebody for help in that process.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think being very in tune to our kids, because we'll know if we're a student of our child, we know when something's off, and we don't let them get away with it. I'm fine. No, you're not. I can see it in your eyes. What's going on? And then letting them share their story, but then not dismissing it, placating it, or fixing it. Just going, I am so sorry that that's what happened.
Yeah.
Can I hold you? Can I sit with you while you process? Because I think parents, we desire for our kids not to feel that way because it's our child. We don't want them to be in that pain. But I think there's something about sitting with them in that pain and that frustration, and allowing them to work through it with us, versus us trying to fix it, placate it, dismiss it. Because I think parents want to dismiss it, going, "Oh, it wasn't that big of a deal." There was a genuine intention, genuine care in that statement, but it's so damaging for a kid. So I think you're right. Just sitting with them, processing it out, validating it, for a small t, which could be embarrassment, could be being made fun of. It could be whatever it might be, from a school standpoint.
And I'm guessing that there's probably a couple people listening who are reflecting on moments in their own childhood that they did not have the validation in the process time for something that they were going through. And I'm guessing the best suggestion we have is seek someone out.
Well, yeah, because if it's something like that from a child, you're 35 years old right now, and that was something that happened when you were 5 or 6, and you're remembering it right now, it's kind of taking hold, right? It's taking hold in your functioning and how you interact and engage the world around you. And so it could be more entangled than you expect.
Yeah.
So
my uneducated perspective, well, it's a little bit educated, but my non-technical perspective on trauma is that it's kind of like sticky memories, and memories are supposed to go through this funnel real smoothly, and it's not supposed to stick to the sides. It's supposed to go right through, and that's the normal process that we have. And what trauma does is it just kind of sticks to the walls, and there are some times that we can't just go in there with our fingers and dig it out. It has to be shaken out, or we have to get some sort of I like thinking about EMDR as kind of like the shaking back and forth where it finally just comes loose and falls through. And it takes work. But I think it's important to recognize that, because I think that having trauma can be shame producing. And you can feel like, oh, it's my fault that I have this sticky memory that's attached to me. And I just want to validate and encourage that sometimes the body just does what it needs to do or feels like it needs to do in the moment, and you aren't necessarily responsible for that stickiness. Right. Sometimes memories are just sticky.
And it's our body's way of protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So we can't fault that. Now, what do we do with it after that?
Right.
Once we have that awareness.
And once I finish the Kate DiCamillo book, I'll let you know what Rob does. But I'm really hoping that Rob comes to a point in his journey where he recognizes that he needs to feel, he needs to think, he needs to let it out and express the pain that he's going through after losing his mother. And that once he does that, he starts seeing a clearing up of his legs and a confidence to go back into school, which he doesn't have right now. And I think that's the hope that I have for a lot of people that I run into as well, is I really hope that you have the opportunity and the strength to process what's going on, to face it, to feel the things that are really hard to feel, and to think about the things that are hard to think about, because at the end, it's going to be really good. And we see this with shame a lot with addictions, particularly sexual addictions. It's important to acknowledge it and to have a group of people around you to discuss it, and it has to be open in the light. If it's in the darkness, it kind of just molds over, and I think we do that too often to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the old adage, and maybe we finish with this, but is, the whole, it's better to love and lost than never to love at all. I think a lot of times, and I take that towards our feelings, it's better to feel, even if it's hard, to not to feel at all. Because I've met with a lot of people that are just numb, and they don't want it, they don't like it. It's scary, and it's very much a frightening place when we don't feel anything, right? If we numb out, we don't feel positive or negative. And so for those that are listening, it's better to feel. It's better to engage those feelings, even if it's hard, to work through them and then come out the other side.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us today. And we will look forward to continuing this conversation because I think there's a lot more to talk about with this topic.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/Candid Conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.